Welcome, everybody. John Arvosis here. Welcome to YouTube and TikTok and everybody else who's out there. We are here in the Arvosis Report to talk about Ukraine and the latest news, and it's kind of a creepy news day. Warning you in advance, today's Ukraine news, a little weird. But, you know, such is life. We are talking about war, not exactly a happy topic. We're going to, as always, wait a minute for the TikTokers to join us. Why don't you guys... Oh, is the sound being evil today on TikTok? All right, unplugging and replugging on TikTok. All right, replugged in. Real quick now, is the audio working on TikTok or not? There we go. Okay. My plug's always being goofy. I was just going to say, for all of you, thank you, TikTokers. Thank you, everybody else, for waiting. Do your little introductions where you guys say where you're from and maybe what country at least. And if you feel like saying what town, all the better. But I think it's kind of nice because we have such an interesting mix of people from all over the world, even though it's a little late in the evening. Thank you, Baby Shoe, for that. Even though it's a little late in the evening for the Europeans, I appreciate you guys being here. As I said, I am John Arvosis. This is my daily Ukraine news broadcast. I will spend about the next maybe 25 minutes. We'll see, about half the show talking about the latest news, which is kind of creepy today. It's all about dirty bombs. Story's getting weirder, so unfortunately we have to talk about it. And then we will do Q&A, question and answer at the end. For the second half of the show. And we can talk more about the dirty bomb story. We can talk about whatever you guys want. But usually about Ukraine, I prefer. So let me, since we got a good TikTok crowd already, let me just sort of dispense with the introduction. So as I said, I will talk for about half an hour max about the news of the day. Today's big story is the dirty bomb threat growing in Ukraine from Russia. Then I will take your questions on TikTok. Please submit your questions via the Q&A function that you will find in my profile. Go to my TikTok profile. You'll see Q&A. Use that to submit them. Way easier than anything else. On YouTube and everywhere else that's not TikTok, I've got you. I've got TikTok here, and I got the other guys over here, just so you guys know why I keep looking over at them. For you guys, use the comment section on the bottom of your apps, and as a thank you to all of you, thank you for the and thank you, by the way, D Dyke there. As a thank you to you guys on TikTok, the TikTok subscribers who are the paid monthly folks, I will answer your questions first. I've got a little button on the bottom that pulls you guys up first. On YouTube, I will answer the subscription not the subscription, but the super chat questions first. So thank you for that. And just as a reminder, I am doing this for free. The only income I get is from you guys and you guys. So please keep the gifts coming, the super chat, the wonderful gifts on TikTok. I really appreciate those. And you guys help keep me going and help keep me doing the work by doing that. So thank you. Let me just dive right in. So actually, because today we're talking about a really creepy story that's dirty bombs involving nuclear materials and all this kind of stuff. And because it's getting a little creepy in Ukraine, the story, I first wanted to start with, thank you for the cauldron, Dawn. I first wanted to start with an actually funny story from Ukraine. Listen to this. This comes from TASS, which is one of the big Russian newspaper wire services. It's an old, actually it was an old Soviet one news service before this, but they're one of the big ones. So this isn't just like some fringe publication. The apparatus of the Security Council. So the Assistant Secretary of the Security Council of Russia. Oh, thank you, Joseph. That was really sweet of you. The Security Council of Russia. The Assistant Secretary, Alexei Pavlov, weighed in about a very serious threat that we have in Ukraine. The Russians have now discovered yet another threat in Ukraine. Listen to what the threat is. The Church of Satan has spread across Ukraine. It is one of the religions officially, and it is one of the religions officially registered in the United States. The desatanization of Ukraine, where hundreds of sects now operate, sure, is becoming increasingly urgent, said Alexei Pavlov, Assistant Secretary of the Russian Security Council. I believe that with the continuation of the special military operation, it becomes more and more urgent to carry out the desatanization of Ukraine. As the head of the Chechen Republic, Razmlam Kadyrov aptly put it, the complete desatanization. I mean, these guys, and we say this a lot, but I think it's important. There's something else going on in the Russian sort of mentality, in the Russian mindset. And the actual Russian, I've studied Russia, but meaning the Russian experts who devote their entire life to studying Russia will tell you this. They don't think like us. I mean, the Russian government does not approach things the way a Western government would, and we shouldn't assume that they do. And this is a perfect example. They are putting out in one of their top news organizations an official statement from the Russian government saying that Satanism is taking off across Ukraine, and that's one of the main goals is to get rid of Satan, right? That's why they invaded. I mean, to us, that just sounds insane, but to them, clearly this resonates with their people, or they wouldn't say it. I mean, they know what works with their people. But I have to laugh. I'm going to go on. We'll go on with the rest of the serious Ukraine stuff in a second. But I have to laugh at just that one line. That the one guy, the deputy of the Security Council says, it is urgent to carry out the desatanization of Ukraine. And then he goes on, or as the head of the Chechen Republic aptly put it, the complete desatanization. Well, what the heck's the difference between the satanization and the complete desatanization? I mean, that they even thought that was like, ooh, put in the quote about the complete desatanization. I mean, it's just like, oh my God. Anyway, thank you for the gift on TikTok. All right, so the more serious news today, unfortunately, is dirty bombs. The story's getting creepier and creepier. Now, oh boy, this is a story that cropped up a few days ago. I know the church lady from SNL, a story that cropped up a few days ago, and it's just getting a little creepier, guys. So unfortunately, we have to talk about it again. And actually, I'm devoting a lot of the show to that story and just a couple others rather than jumping around on too many topics today because it's important. And the West is starting to get worried about this too. So the deal is, okay, a dirty bomb first. Let's talk about what a dirty bomb is. A dirty bomb is simply a conventional weapon, explosives, right? However, explosives, whatever you use, and you put some nuclear material next to it. Plutonium, uranium, whatever, spent fuel rods from a nuclear reactor. You put it with, and in principle, thank you for the hat toasted. In principle, when the conventional bomb goes off, it also throws, bomb goes off and it throws a lot of stuff around, right? It throws dirt. It throws, if it's next to a building, it could tear a building apart and throw little bits of, paper around, wall board, whatever, right? It's a bomb. Well, if you tie nuclear material to the bomb, it doesn't blow up as a nuke. That's not the way it works. Nuclear weapons are very precise, and you got to build them in just the right way for the nuclear material to, set a nuclear chain reaction and all this kind of stuff, right? I'm going to put on my jacket. I'm getting cold. What happens with a dirty bomb is they put the nuke. I feel like Mr. Rogers is putting on his sweater to start the show. With a dirty bomb, the bomb goes off, and you've got the nuclear material next to it. And what happens is when the bomb throws, everything in the air, it also throws the nuclear material in the air. And the idea is this is first and foremost a terror weapon because, especially, I think it is because of the Cold War. All of us hear dirty bomb, nuclear, it has nuclear material, and we think, oh my God, right? And like, I live in Washington, D.C. I mean, if I were to hear, or any of us were to hear a bomb that contained nuclear material went off downtown, you'd flip out, right? You wouldn't just be like, a bomb went off? That's really scary. You'd be nuclear. You'd literally be like, get in the car and get me out of town, right? Because it's nuclear. That's one of the main goals of a dirty bomb. Secondly, it does or can spread nuclear material. It can pulverize the nuclear stuff and throw it everywhere. That's really bad. Because what happens is it contaminates the ground. And then I was reading about this just before coming on with you guys. It contaminates the ground in the area. That ground, literally, they would have to dig 3 feet deep in the soil and remove the soil and take it away. 3 feet deep. Okay, they would have to remove all the trees. They would have to dig up and knock down all the buildings. And then the buildings themselves, the material left over, would have to be stored in some kind of nuclear containment kind of situation. So really buried. And I see MT Histering and others actually, MT is weighing in a little bit. MT is one of my buddies that always has interesting comments to add. Now, I will tell you, it's not easy to make a dirty bomb work. And I'm going to explain this to you in a second as well. MT is saying a dirty bomb would also irradiate an area to the point to keep enemy troops out. And Russia has shown that they do not care about irradiating their own troops. That is true, but so anyway, that's in general what a dirty bomb is. The Russians have been accusing the Ukrainians for several days now of preparing to set off a dirty bomb. And because the Russians won't stop talking about it, it's starting to scare people in the West. Thank you, Setterman. Now, actually, let me say one thing really quick. I'm about to scare you in terms of what I tell you, but the one interesting thing I saw right before coming on the show tonight was that the Institute for the Study of War, which is a really big defense think tank here in Washington, D.C., they do a lot of defense analysis. People around the world rely on ISW. Very, very serious place. They think that it's very unlikely at this point that Putin would use a dirty bomb. Now, the Western governments, including my own here in America, are very worried. ISW says, they're not worried about it. So I want to put that up front because this is a scary topic. So let's keep going. So we're talking about a dirty bomb. Now, the New York Times was saying how basically what a dirty bomb would be, New York Times, the most commonly imagined version is small enough to fit in a backpack and contains perhaps 20 pounds or less of explosives, with a smaller mass of radioactive material placed on top. So you'd have the explosives in a backpack, and on top of it, you would put some kind of radioactive material. But the Times goes on and says it is very difficult to use a dirty bomb effectively, which is good news for all of us, and especially the Ukrainians. Listen to this. The size of the main charge, so the size of the actual conventional bomb, is hugely important. Too big is a problem, too little is a problem. Use too much explosive material, and the radioactive substance could be largely consumed by the intense heat as the bomb detonates. Now, this was something I actually didn't realize. So in other words, if the bomb is too strong, the explosion of the bomb pretty much just destroys the nuclear material, which is a good thing, right? Use too little explosive, and the device would not spread the radioactive material very far. So in other words, if the explosion is too small, maybe it spreads it around your backyard, or maybe it spreads it, 100 feet away. That's bad and scary, but it's not really causing a lot of damage. So that is an important point to raise, but now let's go on with why people are worried. So the Russians have been accusing the Ukrainians of preparing a dirty bomb at 2 facilities in Ukraine. I was just hearing on the news, one of them was some kind of a scientific institute in Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, and the other one, I don't recall where they were saying. Important to know that both facilities are regularly inspected by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, which is the United Nations nuclear watchdog. And in fact, they're going to inspect these facilities in the next couple of days in Ukraine. So that's one important point. Okay, look, if you're on the show here with me, odds are you probably already believe that Ukraine isn't going to blow up. You don't really believe the Russians claiming Ukraine's going to blow up a dirty bomb, right? A bomb with nuclear weapons. With nuclear material in it. But nonetheless, important to raise that point. So first, the Russians brought this up in the Russian media, and they made this claim: Ukraine's getting ready to blow up a dirty bomb. Then the Russian defense minister called our defense minister here in America, the Secretary of Defense in Britain, the same minister in France, and also in Turkey, and said to them, getting hot again, and said to them, oh, the Ukrainians are preparing to, set off this dirty bomb, and, God knows what we're going to do in response. In response to that, the US, the French, and the Brits put out a joint statement. I believe it was from our secretaries of state, our foreign ministers, that called it patently false. What was the word we used? Oh, I don't have it here. But basically, we put out a statement saying it was patently false what the Russians were saying. Oh, I do have it here. Transparently false, and that it was an effort by Russia, and this is where things get scary, to justify possibly using a nuclear bomb. So the concern that our governments have is that the Russians keep talking about Ukraine possibly using a dirty bomb, right? Which would be a conventional bomb with some nuclear material on it, because the Russians themselves are thinking of using a dirty bomb. And the Russians would set off the dirty bomb in Ukraine. They would say, look, there was an explosion, and all of our, anti-Semite today on Kanye, is that you? Somebody just wrote something really horrifically anti-Semitic in the comments. I didn't know Kanye. Ye. Didn't know Ye was visiting us today. That one threw me for a second. So the concern is that the Russians would set up a false flag, basically. They would blow up a conventional bomb, it would include nuclear material. Then everyone's Geiger counters would go off and the Russians would say, aha, look, there's nuclear material. Those crazy Ukrainians, we told you they were going to blow up a conventional weapon with radiation. Now we have to nuke the Ukrainians in response to stop them, right? So the concern that America and our Western allies have is that the Russians are talking about this because the Russians themselves are going to set off a dirty bomb, but that's not the concern. They're going to set off the dirty bomb in order to justify using a nuclear bomb in Ukraine. And that's really, obviously, that's scary. Now, a little more details. So we know that the Russian defense minister, like I said, had called all of our defense secretaries to say this was true, even though we told them it's not true. Then you've got the chief of the general staff, who is basically the most senior uniformed, thank you for that, Jody, the most senior uniformed military official in Russia. He would be akin to the American Joint Chiefs of Staff or the British Chief of Defense Staff. And what happened was Valery Gerasimov called General Milley, who's the American head of the military, uniformed head of the military, that is, and the British Chief of the Defense Staff, Sir Anthony Ratikin, and repeated the same crazy allegation that the Ukrainians were getting ready to set off a dirty bomb, a dirty nuke, right? Then Lavrov, their foreign minister of the Russians, says he wants to raise the issue at the UN and forces the Security Council to have a secret meeting today behind closed doors to discuss Ukraine's plans to set off this bomb. This has got a lot of people worried. What worries them is the Russians are expending way too much effort in this. The fact that they've got all of these senior Russian officials accusing everybody and accusing Ukraine and calling everybody. I will say this. I think there is actually, let me reset real quick because I noticed we've got more TikTok followers now. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. I do a daily show Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, and I talk about the latest news from Ukraine for about half an hour, and then at the half hour or so, we switch over into question and answer, more about Ukraine, whatever you guys want to talk about Ukraine. Today, I am talking about increased chatter from the Russians accusing the Ukrainians of preparing to set off a dirty bomb in Ukraine, which would be a conventional bomb that has nuclear material attached to it. And instead of it being a nuclear bomb, because a conventional bomb with, let's say, some plutonium attached to it, whatever, dangerous as hell for the person blowing off the bomb, if it blows up, it doesn't cause a nuclear explosion, but it could potentially throw that plutonium all over the place and contaminate a city block, maybe even bigger, depending on the winds and the explosion. And frankly, it'll scare the hell out of people because anything dealing with nukes and a bomb obviously scares all of us, right? The concern is, just to recap really quick, is that the Russians are claiming that the Ukrainians are getting ready to use a dirty bomb. Thank you, Jesse. Because the Russians are actually planning to use a dirty bomb in Ukraine. They're going to blame the Ukrainians when it goes off. And they're going to say, well, if those crazy Ukrainians set off a dirty bomb that had nuclear energy attached to it, right? It was almost a nuclear bomb. Then we, the Russians, are going to respond with a nuclear bomb and attack Ukraine since they used one on our troops. That's the danger. And that's what America and all of our allies are worried about. Now, I did say earlier that the Institute for the Study of War is not worried about this. They say that it is unlikely. This is a big defense think tank that I like and a lot of the big defense folks like. Institute for the Study of War. They assess that the Kremlin is unlikely to be preparing an imminent false flag dirty bomb attack. That's great because Institute for the Study of War is very serious and very trustworthy. I will tell you this. It's clear from checking out the news in the last day, our government, very worried. The American government and the Brits and the French are not too happy about what's going on either. Now, the final thing here would be, I guess, 2 points to raise. What should be NATO's response if the Russians do this? And why would the Russians want to go nuclear in the end? And what I mean is two things. What is our response if the Russians use a false flag dirty bomb first? Not what's the response to a nuke, because we've already discussed that and our governments have already planned what to do if Russia uses a nuke, right? Something catastrophic, they say, but we don't know what. But what if the Russians use a dirty bomb? And the reason I raise this is because, unfortunately, they're two different things. A dirty bomb would be awful, but it wouldn't be a nuclear bomb. does that mean that you respond as a government somehow a little less than you would, right? The Russians blow up a conventional bomb that has nukes attached to it. Would you do the same response you do if the Russians actually blew up a nuke? I mean, these are the kind of things that our officials have to consider, and it's not really clear. Let me see real quick here. John Hoover is weighing in and saying they could use cesium-137 found in medical equipment and is not dangerous in the short term, but will set off radiation detectors. People won't care about the type of material, they will freak. I know that's a very interesting point. So what John is saying, and actually I'd read this as well, that it's very precise material you have to use for a dirty bomb. It's not like any kind of nuclear stuff would be, but one of them is medically associated nuclear material. What John is saying is that you could use cesium-137, thank you, Debbie, for that is found in medical equipment and is not dangerous in the short term. Okay, so it's not as dangerous of nuclear material, but it will set off radiation detectors. So the point is, this bomb blows up. It may not cause a ton of damage compared to what other stuff could, but it's still nuclear. So it sets off all the radiation detectors and it allows the Russians to say, aha, look, aha, right? So no, this is bad. Now, the final point I'll raise here is I can see why the Russians would maybe want to blame let me say 3 points, actually. I can see why the Russians would want to convince everyone out there, and me included, that they were actually the ones about to use a dirty bomb. In other words, the Russians know that we know that they're lying, and that in fact, maybe this means Russia is planning on doing it because Russia is trying to scare the hell out of us. The whole Russian strategy from the beginning has been convince the West, convince our leaders, convince all of us, convince our members of Congress. We had a little blow up today and yesterday with the liberals in the US Congress, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but convince all of them that, oh my God, things are about to go nuclear. We've got to force Ukraine to negotiate. And even if Ukraine has to give up land, they have to stop now, right? Right? I mean, so it makes sense for Russia to try to scare us. Now, I'm not sure it makes sense for Russia to set off the bomb because we're going to know Russia did it, right? And even more so, the final point here, thank you, Hedy. The final point here is I still don't see why Russia would actually want to set off an actual nuclear bomb, right? Just to reiterate, the thinking is from the Western governments, including my own, that Russia is accusing Ukraine of preparing to launch a dirty bomb, which is a conventional bomb with nuclear material, so that Russia can say, look what Ukraine did. They set off nuclear material. That's so dangerous. We need to nuke Ukraine. And then the Russians would nuke Ukraine. But why? What advantage does Russia get in nuking Ukraine? It's still not clear. The bombs Russia would use, we believe, would be tactical nukes, which are these small nukes. They don't provide enough of an advantage, a military advantage. And I've said this before, because it's not like Ukraine's 150,000 troops are all standing on a postage stamp. So all you have to do is drop one bomb on them and they all die. They're spread around the country, right? There isn't, the experts don't think that there's a military advantage. I don't think, thank you, official, for that. I don't think the Ukrainians themselves are going to back down, even if the Russians use a nuke. Does anybody think the Ukrainians are going to go, oh, thank you, Pam, that the Ukrainians are going to go, oh, well, now the Russians used a nuke. I guess we'll just give them Crimea and Zaporizhia and Kherson, right? There's no way. The Ukrainians are going to be angrier than ever if the Russians use a nuke. So that's not going to happen. And finally, what happens, and I'll move on to the next topic, and then we can talk about this in the question and answer. Finally, what happens with NATO? If the Russians use a nuclear bomb, NATO enters the war. Now, I think NATO may enter the war by just doing a no-fly zone. We may not start bombing Russian troops immediately, but Russia can't beat Ukraine. Currently, Ukraine is on the march, slowly, right? But the Russians are not doing well. The Russians don't have a very bright future in terms of what's going on with the war in Ukraine. Why in God's name would they want America and NATO to enter the war? They'd lose, even if it permit them to say, look, our constituents in Russia, we told you the Americans were behind it. Okay, so you get a momentary blip with the population in Russia that goes, those evil Americans, but then you lose because the Americans will beat you in a conventional war. NATO will beat you. So I still don't see what the point is of Russia doing this. In any case, just be aware of this. Like I said, it was the main topic I wanted to bring up. I've got other news to talk about too, because I think it's really dangerous what Russia's doing. And I'm not sure, and I will make a final point on this. Somebody had mentioned in the comments on TikTok, and they weren't wrong. I don't think Russia will use a nuclear bomb in Ukraine. I still don't. Thank you, Chaz, for that. But I still worry about this kind of brinksmanship. I do worry about them using a dirty bomb. I do. So that's the difference. Just to remind folks, I am John Aravosis. You're watching the Aravosis Report. We are here to talk about Ukraine, about the latest news from the war in the last 24 hours. And then after I give you the news summary, we will do questions and comments and all sorts of things for maybe a good half hour or so. I am doing this as independent media, so please help me out by those gifts on TikTok. Help me a lot. Thank you. The super chat and everything else on YouTube helps as well. And I appreciate you guys' support because, as I said, I'm trying to do this full time. Now, the other story I think I'll tell you about, and then let me tell you really quick. Brittney Griner. So Brittney Griner, the American basketball star, female basketball star, she lost her appeal today. This is not a surprise. Thank you, love. Literally love for the gift on TikTok. Brittney, and for the butterflies, Brittney lost her appeal today, which means now she will have to start serving a 9-year sentence in a penal colony. The Russian penal colonies, I looked this up, they're better than the gulags that were horrific prison camps. But I mean, this is Russia. The description of the New York Times was, oh, hello. Thank you, Flower Lady. That's beautiful. I appreciate that. The description of the New York Times was, some prisoners are tortured or beaten by fellow inmates. Some have to work 16-hour days. A few are forced to watch Russian propaganda on repeat. This is not an American or a Western-style prison, right? So anyway, the final thing on Brittney is, I do think there's the possibility that Brittney could still be freed as part of a deal between Russia and America, and we have to release some of their, spies or whatever. And the only way that deal, she was sentenced for 9 years. The only way, and it was for drug possession or drug smuggling, I guess, as they were calling it. But the way, what was I going to say on this? If we were going to reach a deal with the Russians to free Brittney, the way we would do it, Brittney Griner, is she would have to be convicted first, because the Russians would want to basically have her and say, she's going to prison, because now that she's going to prison and she's going to be in this horrible penal colony, literally in Siberia, it puts more pressure on Biden to work out some kind of a deal to help the woman. And I think so there's a possibility that this had to be the first step in her actually getting a deal. Possibly. It's horrible. It's still horrible. I mean, I can't imagine that poor woman having to go to a Russian penal colony. These things are horrible, but this still could be the first step in some kind of a deal. And there have been prisoner exchanges. There have been. So, I wouldn't say no. Now, the other story I want to tell you about really quick is this story about the American Progressive Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. So the United States House of actually, I'm sorry, real quick. Dragana had a comment here. Let me see real quick. Dragana's, and then I'll tell you. Is Russia accusing Ukraine of ridiculous caca to waste Ukrainian time and resources trying to prove innocence with allies? I don't know how much time it wastes. I mean, because, the Ukrainians have to let the UN in and the UN investigates. I think it is, and this will tie in perfectly to the next story. I think it's about freaking us out in the West. It's about freaking you out. It's about freaking out our elected officials. That's what this is about. Because if they freak us out, then maybe we will put pressure on Ukraine and pressure on our own government to no longer support Ukraine, or pressure on Ukraine to reach a deal, a compromise that Ukraine doesn't want to reach, because the compromise would be giving up their own land, right? Which is crazy. Laura Pettit, your message didn't send. That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Okay. Just write what your question is, Laura, and I will read it right here. That's what I thought was happening. Oh, here we go. Good. Perfect timing, Laura. And thank you for that. How do we bring about change by our government to clean up our domestic contamination from Manhattan Project? Jeez. I mean, Laura, I'm not necessarily an expert on that. First of all, I'm going to tell you the truth. I didn't even know that there still was domestic contamination that needed to be cleaned up from the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project, thank you, Bonnie, for those. The Manhattan Project, for anybody who doesn't know, was the project during World War II that America used to develop nuclear weapons. So, I mean, you're talking back to the 1940s here. I had no idea. I mean, I had no idea it was even an issue. You know, in that case, I would say somebody's got to bring attention to it. This is the problem I had with, by the way, real tangent, but what the heck? These kids who are throwing mashed potatoes and soup at like Monet's in art museums and stuff. Yes, it's a thing. So in the last few weeks, at least, maybe the last few months, climate activists, young kids especially, have decided that the way they're going to get attention and change on climate change is by throwing tomato soup and food at the most famous paintings and artworks in the world. The good thing is they've been picking paintings, at least from what I read, that have protective coverings on them. Still, not really thrilling to me. There's been a big debate about it. What worries me about it is as actually Ali, I forget Ali's last name, but a really good TikToker I enjoy. He's a comedian, I think, who's a student at Oxford. But he was raising the point that for activism to be effective, you've got to create awareness, but also then convince people to join your side. His point was, what is the point of creating awareness on climate change? We're all aware of climate change. So throwing this stuff at a painting so that the newspapers write about climate change, that's not, I mean, newspapers are already writing about climate change, right? So the awareness thing isn't doing anything. Secondly, are you convincing people or are you pissing people off? And I would argue, frankly, you're pissing me off. And I'm already like, I'm a big climate guy, right? Like, I think climate change is real. I want us to do something about it. But you're pissing me off because I think it's immature and I don't like it. So let's come back here. On something like this, where I didn't even realize that there was still environmental damage from the Manhattan Project that hadn't been cleaned up 70 years later, that's the kind of thing where trying to do awareness on it would be great, right? For the activists to literally create news about it, because most of us don't even know it's an issue. So anyway, all right. Let's move on here. So what happened with the U.S. Congress yesterday, and it's an important story for you guys to know about. Just to reset really quick, John Aravosis, I am here. This is the Aravosis Report. Every day I talk about Monday to Friday, the news from Ukraine, summarize the news of the last 24 hours, what I think is important. So what I think is important right now is we're going to talk about the liberal caucus, the progressive caucus in the U.S. House. In this case, progressive caucus tends to mean the most liberal members. Thank you, Aztec Dude. Tends to be the most liberal members of the House, or many of them. It's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Squad, a number of these. But it also has some people that I personally like, Jamie Raskin, Ruben Gallego. Well, a lot of them, Ruben did not, but a lot of them signed onto a letter that was released, I think, yesterday, that called on President Biden to negotiate, a compromise with Russia to the war. Now, the letter, I talked about it yesterday. The letter was like 2.5 pages long or something like that. And it contained a lot of things that were kind of offensive. First of all, doing it 2 weeks before an election. The U.S. congressional elections are 2 weeks from today. Currently, Democrats are expecting to quite possibly lose the election in the House and the Senate. I mean, it's close, and it ain't. The House was never good. The Senate may not be good either. So Biden is really trying to do everything he can to unify Democrats. These members of Congress come out and they do a public letter to Joe Biden, in essence, criticizing him on Ukraine. Public letters in Washington. When you write a letter to the president and you make it public and give it to the media, that's because you're being a jerk. I was going to use the D word, but I'm trying to be good on TikTok and YouTube. That's because you're being a jerk. You issue the letter publicly and give it to the media because you want to embarrass the person you're writing the letter to. So these members of Congress, Democrats, were trying to embarrass Joe Biden. That's a problem. All Democrats. That's a problem. Second of all, the letter was all about, thank you, Wayne, for that. The letter was all about, diplomacy. And they even explained what they mean in this letter. They said, well, for example, you need to find something that Russia wants and see if you can give Russia what it wants as a possible deal to end the war. And you're reading this going, oh, is that how diplomacy works? That you actually try to find something that each party wants and is willing to agree to? I mean, it was like it was written by a child. Well, people were livid. Actually, there was one sentence in particular. I read it yesterday to the folks who were watching my show yesterday. There was one sentence in particular in this House Progressive Caucus letter to Biden about Ukraine. And it said something like, we believe it's in America's, the world's, and Ukraine's best interest to reach a peace deal now. And it was like, who are you to be lecturing Ukraine? America, sure, you're American elected officials, but you're speaking about what's in Ukraine's best interest, that you think the Ukrainians are wrong and that Ukraine should just reach a deal now with Russia and give away its land? I mean, in any case, very obnoxious. I had a late last night, Sarah, thank you for that. Late last night, I had one of the Democratic congressmen who wrote the letter. I had tweeted at him on Twitter. I've got a big following, which helps because it gets you attention. He wrote me back and said, and I'm hoping I've got this. Yes, I've got this here. His name is Mark Pokin. He's from Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin. And he wrote me back and said, I'm not sure a lessening of bombing and death is ever a bad idea. Let me read this to you again. I'm not sure a lessening of bombing and death is ever a bad idea. And I wrote him back and said, so we should have surrendered in World War II? I mean, let's face it, it would have lessened a lot of bombing and death if America just surrendered and if Europe just surrendered and we let the Japanese and the Germans win. It would, right? Ever. He said ever. He's not sure it's ever, right? So I was kind of pissed. Well, what happened overnight, people got so pissed off about this. I mean, livid that the individual members of Congress, thank you, Al, for that, individual members of Congress started saying, well, I started clarifying who had signed the letter, what they really meant. No, I'm totally in agreement with Biden. I'm totally in agreement with Ukraine. I didn't mean that we should change our Ukraine policy. All of them, well, finally this morning, they revoked the letter. So they now are saying the letter is now unsent to Biden, which is weird, but great, but a little weird. Elise, I see you. I'm going to finish talking about this and then I'll do your question, Elise, or comment. The concern is, and somebody, I'm forgetting who now, Brandon Friedman, I think it was Brandon, who I follow on Twitter, wrote a really good thread last night explaining this. And one of the big problems with this isn't just, first of all, the fact that we shouldn't be dictating terms to Ukraine. And also the idea that, a little genocide is okay because at least we'd save lives. Of course, you're not really saving lives if you let a genocide happen. That's kind of the self-definition of genocide, as it were. But think of what message this is sending to Putin, right? We've got 2 weeks to the American elections. Kevin McCarthy, who is the Republican leader in the U.S. House, he is expected to be the Speaker of the House if the Republicans win in 2 weeks, most likely. Speaker of the House being like the person who runs the whole place. McCarthy came out like a week ago and said that, the administration shouldn't expect any more blank checks for Ukraine and basically made it sound like the Republicans may not fund aid to Ukraine anymore if they win the House. He then kind of backed off because it caused a big kerfuffle, big kind of controversy, but he kind of backed off. But still, we know a lot of the MAGA members, the Trump members of the House, do not like Ukraine because Trump doesn't like Ukraine. So what possessed them 2 weeks before the election to basically reiterate the kind of message that's coming from the far right of the Republican Party is now coming from the far left? And what does Vladimir Putin think when he sees this? Vladimir Putin is looking and he says, okay, in 2 weeks, we're probably going to have the MAGA wing of the party, the Republicans, win the U.S. House of Representatives. That means Biden has now got to negotiate with people who think like Trump and think Ukraine's evil. They believe the Putin messaging on Ukraine because it's also shared by Fox News and Trump and things like this. So they're going to believe the Putin news on Ukraine. And at the same time, it looks like Biden's left flank in the U.S. House, the Democrats aren't happy with him either. And they agree with the Republicans. And they also talked about nuclear war and all this kind of stuff, the same thing the Republicans talk about. If I were Putin, I'd say, you know what? We just need to continue this war a little bit longer. Let's just continue it again and again and again. And eventually the Americans are going to cave and they're going to stop helping Ukraine. And so what you did is you actually helped convince the Russians not to negotiate. If you're a Russian and you heard this, you'd say, don't negotiate. The Americans are falling apart. In 2 weeks, Ukraine aid could be in total danger because of the Republicans and the Democrats. So you might as well not negotiate and keep the war going. And of course, they had to talk about nuclear war and the threat of nuclear war going. Well, if I'm Putin and I hear that, I go, okay, House Democrats are panicking about nuclear war, and we already know Fox News is panicking about nuclear war. I need to do whatever I can to keep people even more worried about nuclear war if I'm Vladimir Putin. So anyway, very bad. All right, guys, let me stop with that right now. There were some other little stories, but let's skip it. Let's jump into the questions. What I will tell you all is on TikTok, any of the SNN subscribers, if you've got questions, throw them in and I will see them. I'm pushing the little button on TikTok that lets me see your questions first. Elise, let me pull up your comment. Elise, it seems like Putin is spending most of his energy now on psychology. Yep. Distracting Russians from tactical failure with attacks on Ukrainian civilians and utilities. Yes. In other words, attack Ukrainian energy infrastructure because at least it's bombs going off and the Russian people go, yay, you're bombing them, even though it's not making a difference in the war. And scaring the West with mind Fs. That is correct. I mean, look, I think Putin's lost this war. That doesn't mean the war is going to end anytime soon, but Putin lost the war, right? He's not, I mean, he's, it's not clear how he's going to win this. His army, they're out of men. They had to draft these additional 300,000 men. I think they've got over 200,000 now. They're not qualified. They're not being trained. They're not even being trained how to fire weapons, some of them, or the weapons training they got was literally like a couple bullets. They're being thrown to the front of the war against Ukrainian troops that know what they're doing. It's horrible. It's horrible, right? What they're doing to these Russians. I mean, I don't feel sorry for them, but you know what I'm saying? So you've got, thank you for the October thing there. The Russians are running out of some weapons. We know they've had to turn to the Iranians for surface-to-surface missiles. There was talk of they also are going to Iran now for helmets and flak jackets, like body armor and stuff, because the Russians don't have it. Okay. And what was the third point I was going to make on this? And just the Ukrainians are now on the counteroffensive. The Ukrainians are now finally starting to get their land back. If you're the Russians, there isn't like on the horizon, you're not going, oh, give us 6 months and we'll turn this war around. That's not really what people are saying. So what do? You've got to play a psychological game to keep your country from overthrowing you if you're Putin, but also to convince the West to stop supporting Ukraine. That's what I think is going there. He has to use the nuclear threat, Putin does, to scare the heck out of you and out of me and everybody else, so that we tell our governments, and our governments even say, don't support Ukraine anymore. It's too dangerous. Exactly what these Democratic members of the U.S. House did, these liberal members of the U.S. House, demand that basically we've got to, as that congressman said to me, anything that lessens the bombings and lessens the deaths is a good thing. And it's like, well, not actually anything, because letting Russia get away with a genocide would not actually be a good thing, right? Any clue, Chaz is saying, any clue, and I'm going to pick up, like I said, some of the subscribers here on TikTok. Any clue on when anti-aircraft systems would be delivered to Ukraine? No, although, God, I hope things are soon. There was more talk of additional anti-aircraft systems, I guess a Hawk system it's called, that goes back to the Vietnam era, but we've upgraded it many times, about it going to Ukraine as well. I thought I had heard some of this stuff was going to go quite soon, like even in the next week or two. So, I mean, that's good, but are people still suggesting Putin is unwell physically? No, that doesn't mean he's not, but the story hasn't been popping up any. Now, mind you, the Putin is unwell story could have also been disinformation. I mean, we could have created it. Another Western government could have created it. Who knows? It could have been something to make Putin a little upset, but also make him less secure at home, because his own people hear the news, because they're a super secretive dictatorship. His own top generals go, well, the press is saying Putin's dying. I mean, is he? Maybe we need to get rid of him. So who knows? Yep. Okay. How can we get them? Oh, that's something else. Okay. That's it on there. You guys, Elise, Elise? Yes, so that is what's going on, Elise. And now let me pull up a TikTok question on my phone in the Q&A box. So do use the Q&A box if you would in my profile. Boom. And I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. We talk every day from like 6 to 7 Eastern about the latest news from Ukraine. And then I do Q&A, which we're doing right now, taking your questions to talk about the war in Ukraine. Do the majority of Russians still support the war, or could we possibly see a revolt at some point soon? Two different questions. Russian support for the war is decreasing. Now, this is a dictatorship, so hard to do a poll. You know, I mean, they do polls, but do you really believe, I think the group is called Levada or something over there. Do you really believe their polls? Because let's face it, are you going to tell a pollster, oh, I think Putin's nuts, this war was a disaster, when he could have you thrown out a window or thrown in jail for 15 years? Quite literally, they passed a law that said, you know, you go to jail for 15 years if you diss the war, right? So that's, having said that, support has dropped. People are way more concerned right now because what happened, and this is a good thing, Putin needed more men, right? So he did this big mobilization, right? They were going to get 300,000 more men that were going to be, you know, drafted and all this kind of stuff. And they've got at least 200,000. Well, what happened was they did get 200,000 more men who are not being trained very well, men who are not good at this. A lot of them don't even have military experience. And then 700,000 men or more fled for the border and left the country entirely because they didn't want to fight. So he now has caused a disaster at home. Everybody knows somebody. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating slightly, but I would suspect that everybody knows somebody who's either fighting in Ukraine, has fought in Ukraine, or has run for the borders to leave the country. Right? That's not great. That makes people worry. If you're a mom or a dad or a grandma or a grandpa, you're worrying about your kid, or you're worrying about your grandkid, or you know of people already who have died, right? I mean, they're talking about, we don't know how many, but the numbers we're saying in the West, I think the conservative numbers are that the Russians have lost to death, injury, or desertion between like 60,000 and maybe 90,000 men. That's a huge number. That's a huge number. I mean, B. Leslie, that's the casualty count we believe. But when we say casualty in military terms, it means injury or death, or injury and death combined, right? So 60 to 90,000 men, but that includes death. It includes injuries that can no longer fight. It includes men who have deserted, right? 60 to 90,000 is a heck of a lot. So that has got to be causing problems for Putin with the polls back home, that people are basically freaking out because now the war has gotten personal, right? Now the war is affecting them. It's one thing to support the great patriotic special operation when it's not your butt on the line and it's not your brothers or your sons or your dad's butt on the line, but now it is. And now people are going, and people know it's not going well. It's not like it's a war that's going really well. They know, they're hearing about their neighbors getting injured and their neighbor's kid dying and their neighbor's husband dying. And they finally are hearing even the news reports where now the Russians are being much more honest in their evening news about how the war is going. So people are seeing that and they're going, oh my God. So anyway, no, I think final point on that. Does that mean Putin's going to be overthrown? No. Thank you, love. Literally love for that, the love baby. That's a whole other question. The Russians don't have a real history of overthrowing their governments. I mean, you go back to the revolution, but that was 1917, you know? So there isn't a lot of people power in Russia. There's been some uprisings, so to speak, that have been then clamped down. So, you know. NATO Allied Air Command Headquarters. Oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe you shouldn't tell people that, though. Thank you for the gift, Bonnie. How can we fight Russian trolls on social media? Join NAFO. I mean, really, that is one of the ways. There's a group that was formed. You can Google it, NAFO, NAFO. Okay. And it's a pun on NATO. NATO, NATO, is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or in many European languages, it's OTAN, because Organization Treaty America North, right? Or not America, Atlantic of the North, OTAN. Well, this person, Camellia or whatever the guy's name is, jokingly at the end of May comes up with this idea that he calls NAFO, NAFO, and it's the North Atlantic Fellas. Felt like a fella. A fella is a guy, but it's almost like a dandy kind of guy. A fellas association, and he uses the mascot. He takes that Shiba Inu that has been used for a lot of internet memes since I think it was like 2011, 2013. And among other things, it's the Shiba Inu that's used for Dogecoin. So any of you who follow crypto will know that. Well, people, and myself included, actually Daniel O'Neill, who follows us here, Daniel helped tune me into this. People have been creating their own, I'm going to show you this, their own memes. Oh, Daniel, there's Daniel popping up with a question or a comment. Thank you, Daniel. I was just singing your praises before I even saw you do that. So people have been creating their own images, claiming to be them on Twitter for their So I took the picture of me and my dog, removed it, and I put up this picture of me and my dog. I'll show you guys because I'm Greek, and this is the traditional Greek gear worn by the Evzon, which are the ceremonial guards at the parliament, but also it's it is also the traditional garb that my people wore going back to like the Greek Revolution, who are like the Arvanites. It's a whole thing in Greece where these people, ties to Albania in the north, but they wore these skirts and these hats. My dog, of course, wants to go. And then that's my dog there. Well, everyone's been creating. You'll recognize the dog as the Doge dog. Everyone's been creating these things. And actually, the NAFO people putting it in their bios. They've changed their location in their bio to Langley, Virginia. Thank you, Annie, for that. Langley, Virginia is where the CIA is. Oh, thank you, Katya. You helped me reach my goal of 90 subscribers. Thank you for that. Well, Langley, Virginia is where the CIA is. So they're just trolling the Russians. They're just trolling the Russians. It's the funniest damn thing. Anyway, but that's one way of doing it. And it just ticks the Russians off. The people have been doing this. And also people have then been chiming in and following each other on NATO and everything. It's been very funny. It made me laugh. Danielle, I will put on my glasses so I can read Daniel O'Neill's. No, thank you. I appreciate that, Katya. Russia is badly beaten and a dirty bomb may help explain a retreat from Kherson or Melitopol. Here, I'll show people. Daniel is talking about Kherson. Well, Kherson is two things. It's the region right here that the Russians are occupying. It is also the capital of the region, the town of Kherson. The town of Kherson, the Russians are in trouble. The Ukrainians are pushing back here. They're pushing the Russians back to the river. And the Institute for the Study of War, that think tank I told you about, said that they believe Kherson will be liberated or likely liberated by the end of the year. A lot of people think the town will be liberated, but it's a big deal. Melitopol is another town over here that is also occupied by the Russians. So the Russians occupy pretty much this swath down here. So Melitopol over here, Kherson over here. So Russia's badly beaten and a dirty bomb may help explain a retreat from Kherson or Melitopol. It also salts the earth despite the Ukrainians. Oh, you mean literally using a dirty bomb makes the soil dirty, right? Because it contains radioactive material. So the Ukrainians would then not be able to use the land without doing massive amounts of repair work. As I said, you would have to dig up 3 feet of the dirt and get rid of it. 3 feet down in the soil to get rid of the radioactivity. So yes, Putin could do it just to spite the Ukrainians when the Russians are retreating. And Putin gets to faint concern for his army who have been slaughtered on his orders. Oh, I see what you're saying. So what Daniel is saying is Putin uses the dirty bomb. He gets to take a swipe at the Ukrainians because he gets to poison their land, right? Spread radiation all over the Ukrainian land. But at the same time, well, we had to withdraw because the Ukrainians were using nuclear material, right? A dirty bomb, a dirty nuclear bomb almost, right? So that we had no choice but to withdraw for the safety of our men. I mean, maybe, Daniel, my concern would be that you sell the story back home in Russia that those Ukrainians hit us with a dirty bomb, which we know is a conventional bomb that has nuclear material on it. It's not a nuclear explosion, but it does spread nuclear material. Well, people hear that back in Russia, and they're going to be clamoring for the Ukrainians' heads. They're going to be potentially demanding that the Russians themselves use nuclear weapons against the Ukrainians if they really believe the Ukrainians did it. So I'm not sure Putin could get away with this lie that Putin would actually do the dirty bomb, blame it on the Ukrainians, and be able to stop what happens next, which is the Russian people demanding the Ukrainians' heads. That's my concern on that. They're talking about blowing up the dam as well, Carol. That was one possibility. Now, there was some news today in terms of the Russians blowing up the dam. There's been concerns about the Russians blowing up the Kakhovka Dam, which is a dam right about here where the river jogs, the Dnipro River. It jogs right here. And the thought was the Russians might blow it up in order to flood this entire area and stop the Ukrainians from being able to run after the Russian troops as the Russian troops retreat to the south. So the Russian troops would retreat, the Russians blow the dam, and then the water comes across and literally like Moses parting the Red Sea would stop the Ukrainian troops from going further south because there's now be a big flood in the way, right? It also would potentially remove the water that's being used to cool the nuclear plant at Zaporizhia, so the dam is down here. The nuclear plant is right up here by my finger on the south side of the river. So lots of possibilities of why Russia would do this. But there you go. Yeah, sorry. So that was responding to Daniel. All right, I'll pull up Daniel's question. We got another, I'll take another 10 minutes probably because I went a little long on the substance. So yes, I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. We are discussing Ukraine, the last 24 hours of the war, the latest news. A lot of what I've been talking about today has been Russia's increasing comments and the concern in the West about a dirty bomb, and how the Russians are trying to claim that the Ukrainians are going to set off a dirty bomb, which is a conventional nuclear bomb that has nuclear material attached to it. It doesn't cause a nuclear explosion, but it would spread nuclear material around, which would scare the hell out of people. And that what's actually going on is the Russians may be thinking of trying to set off their own dirty bomb so they can blame the Ukrainians and then justify nuking the Ukrainians in return, which would then, lead to World War III, quite literally. You think Russia is targeting the West, however, Ukrainians are being targeted the most? Of course. Well, it depends what you mean. Ukrainians are being targeted the most with the actual weapons, obviously. Now, I will say that's interesting. Are you saying that this is on Twitch? Are you saying that the Russians are also targeting the Ukrainians with propaganda as well, that they're trying to scare the Ukrainians into thinking, oh my God, it's nuclear war, and therefore the Ukrainian people brainwashing? Okay. Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that, but that's a good point too. You're right, that they're trying to scare the Ukrainians into going, oh, this is just getting too dangerous, and maybe we do need peace. Now, the most recent polls show the Ukrainians are still pretty pissed off. That there really hasn't been any weakening among the Ukrainians saying, well, maybe we should settle with the Russians. That hasn't really, by Dharma, it hasn't really been happening, but it's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. No, I think you're right. They're certainly trying to influence the Ukrainians, but I think so far the Ukrainians have shown they're not really susceptible to Russian propaganda yet. The Ukrainians are pretty pissed off, and rightfully so, Exactly. Hi, Dimitro. Exactly. The Ukrainians are like, that's why I keep saying the Ukrainians aren't scared. They're pissed, right? They're angry. And I think and I know a lot of Ukrainians are worried about the nuclear concerns, but I would think they're worried, but it's making them even angrier about the Russians. The fact that the Russians would even be threatening nuclear war attacks on Ukraine, I would think. Let me pull up another question on TikTok in the Q&A. 1 moment. Had to get rid of my NAFO fellow there. Let me back out and go back in. Beep, 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 beep. I did. That was a while ago. The Russian jet that fired a missile towards the Royal Air Force over the Black Sea. Yeah, that was like a couple of weeks ago, end of September. The Brits have said that they're willing to accept that it was an accident. It was a mistake. I mean, Carla's saying, John, what happens if they use a dirty bomb on the dam? Will it contaminate the water? Oh, that's an interesting question. Of course it would contaminate the water. Wow, that gets really interesting. Now, I am not a nuclear expert enough to know, does the radiation fall on top of the water and get washed with the water? Does the radiation sink to the bottom of the dam? So of the water, so now it's polluting the ground under the water, and it's constantly irradiating the fish. Does it get washed out to the sea? Right? You've got this river goes all the way down here and then empties into here. Well, what happens when it hits here? Well, you go down here and you start to get Romania. You go down here and you start to get Russia. You start to get Turkey. You start to get Greece. I mean, do other NATO countries now get affected because the river water is running down there? I don't know enough about it. But I would be very worried about all of those possibilities. Right. The water would be radioactive, but then the question becomes, does the water go as a radioactive drift and disappear somehow? It's radiation. It doesn't disappear. It could dilute, but in the meantime, have you now polluted all the Turkish beaches, all the Romanian beaches? Do you hit the Greek beaches? Right? Even the Italian, Lebanon. I mean, it starts to get it, but when would it delete to safe levels is my concern, right? And to what degree would the land be polluted, and how much of the land would have to be cleaned? Now, who knows? But who knows? It could, that's the other thing, by the way. The other thing the Russians are claiming too, they're also claiming that the Ukrainians are planning to blow up their own nuclear plant, and that the Ukrainians are planning to blow up, what was their other thing? I forgot. There was a third thing the Russians are claiming. Now, the Ukrainians are claiming that the Russians have been having some suspicious activity at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. It's a Ukrainian nuclear plant that the Russians have basically taken hostage. They occupy it. And the Ukrainians say that the Russians were seen in an area of the plant where the spent fuel rods are stored. These spent fuel rods still have radiation in them. And the concern was whether the Russians were stealing the rods in order to plan just this kind of attack. Blow up the moon. Yeah, that hasn't worked too well in a number of the sci-fi films that I've seen. You blow up the moon and you destroy the entire Earth, and Putin doesn't want the Earth to be destroyed, just Ukraine. Kanausi, do you think Russia is constantly talking about imminent nuclear so people start to accept it? With its own people, maybe. Yeah. I think they're trying to freak us out, but they may be trying to get their own people ready. Possibly, yeah. Now, Just Judy is saying, are the Russians still talking or starting again about biolabs? Yeah, I did see one of the Russian broadcasts bringing it up like a night or two ago. The Russians claimed falsely that secret chemical or biological weapons labs in Ukraine and blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, Tucker Carlson on Fox News. And I think Glenn Greenwald was another one who, of course, had to pick it up and run with it because No, the water flow. Nope. Nick was asking about the water flow. The water flows down. So the water flows down here. But then what happens next is this area of water. First of all, the Russians currently occupy this territory. They've occupied Crimea since 2014. So there's like, I don't know, 2 million Russians now probably in Crimea, potentially. Certainly 1 million they brought in at least, okay, of their own people that they brought in here. Then you go around Crimea and you've got Russia over here. Now, would it get too diluted by the time it gets here? I don't know. But the direction of the river is going, now this river comes down like this anyway. So this river isn't necessarily going to Russia. So I'm sorry, depending what you were saying, it wouldn't pollute Russia this way via water necessarily. I actually don't know, though, which way the water flows this way, but it would be a question of whether it gets all the way down there or whether it would dissipate enough to not be a problem. I don't know. Hydrate for me? Yeah, exactly. Well, no, my lips got really dry the other day and I realized they're sore now. So I've been trying to drink more and also put on more product on my lips. So yes, we'll go just another couple more minutes and then we'll be done. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. We are talking about the war in Ukraine. This is the part of the show where I take your questions. We'll do another question or two, and then we will call it quits for the night. And then I'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. And you know what I did today? Totally forgot you guys to ask you guys to follow me. I'm so bad at this. So bad at this. So yes, please on TikTok and elsewhere, if you would follow me, I would appreciate it. On YouTube, on Twitch, and everywhere else, especially TikTok though, because that helps me a lot. Totally forget. Let me look for one more question and then I'll do the recap. I did forget. We also end the show every night by doing a recap where I just go through the news, join my Patreon. You know, you guys are much better than I am at this. Actually, I will say really quick, I do have a Patreon set up that you could support me at. Thank you, Carla. Probably the easiest thing for you guys to do. I have a Discord too. Go to aravosis.com. You see my name in the profiles, aravosis.com, and you'll find my Patreon. You'll find my Discord. You'll find a store that I set up where we're selling kind of cool Ukrainian themed t-shirts and some sweatshirts that I've got to actually put up again, t-shirts right now. You'll find my LinkedIn if you want to know more about who I am. The Discord, we have auctions ongoing at the Discord. I've got auctions for my support, the paid supporters, and also auctions for the free folks. You don't have to pay at the Discord, but if you want to, it helps me out and I appreciate it. So definitely check. We got a really cool thing in the auction right now in the Discord. I can't tell you what it is because I don't think TikTok and YouTube would be very happy with it. So we're keeping that separate. But let me give you the quick news summary. So, sorry. Syndicate is saying about the nuclear stuff, food and water supplies will remain safe. It would cause a great deal of concern and fear. However, it would not cause much radioactive contamination, or increase the danger of adverse health effects. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. That's good to know. That's good to know. All right. Okay. Well, whereas a nuclear meltdown of the nuclear plant would. That's a whole other, that's a obviously much bigger concern. And they're still concerned about the Russians possibly causing that to happen. Yes, 1919 is asking to explain again what a dirty bomb is. Let me do that. And then I will give a summary of the news today, what we just covered. So a dirty bomb is simply a bomb, okay? A regular bomb that somebody has, and what the New York Times described was, imagine a backpack, and a backpack has like 20 pounds of explosives in it, regular explosives. On top of those explosives in the backpack, you get some nuclear material, plutonium, uranium, whatever. And typically you could get it from a nuclear plant or somewhere, right? Or who knows, right? From evil people. You put the nuclear material on top of a regular bomb, and when the regular bomb goes off, the regular bomb throws stuff in the air. Well, it would also throw the nuclear material in the air and scare the hell out of people. Now, it wouldn't explode as a nuclear bomb. Nuclear bombs are very complicated, and the nuclear material doesn't start a chain reaction. It's not like dynamite, where all you do is blow it up and it goes, right, and the whole thing catches on. It's not like that. Nuclear bombs are very hard to get to blow up correctly, right? But what would happen is the conventional bomb blows up, the regular bomb material blows up, and it throws the nuclear material all over the place. Imagine the nuclear material being like a sack of red dye, okay? A bomb goes off and it throws the red dye everywhere. Well, everywhere the red dye is, imagine it being radiation. Well, now you've scared the hell out of people because you've spread radiation everywhere. Now, it may not go very far. It may only go for a city block. I mean, who knows? But it's radiation. Everywhere it lands would have to be decontaminated. If it lands on the ground may have to be dug 3 feet into the ground and removed and stored somewhere as nuclear material. Buildings might have to be knocked down, and the actual building material would then have to be stored as nuclear material. Trees would have to be dug up. So it could cause a lot of chaos. And most importantly, it would scare the hell out of people because, and I said this at the beginning of the show, even though it's not a nuclear bomb, and even though, it would just have not just that, even though it's not a nuclear bomb, just hearing that a bomb went off downtown, whatever city you're in, and it contained nuclear material, you're not going to sit there and go, well, it wasn't a nuclear bomb, so I'm okay. You're going to go, get me the heck out of this town, right? You're going to go get the car. I'm visiting mom. I'm not staying here. People would panic, and that's part of what the point is. But also, if somebody inhaled it, it could kill them. So there's other damage like that too. But it is meant to be, yes, it could be. That's exactly what I was just getting at. It could be radiation poisoning. But the big thing is it's a terror weapon. It's meant as terrorism. It's meant to scare the hell out of people. And in this case, the concern is from the Western governments that the Russians keep talking about Ukraine having a dirty bomb, because it's the Russians who really are getting ready to detonate a dirty bomb. The Russians are going to detonate it. This is the worry. The Russians would detonate it. They would say, Ukraine did that. We told you they were going to do that. And now that Ukraine has detonated a bomb with nuclear material on our troops, we have no choice but to use nuclear weapons to stop Ukraine. And then Russia uses this as an excuse to use nukes. And then NATO gets involved. And then we've got a very bad World War III on our hands. So that's why NATO and the West overall has been very worried, or NATO has been very worried about Putin making all these comments and his people making all these comments about Ukraine preparing to launch a dirty bomb, because we think it's Russia trying to set in motion a series of events that lets Russia use a nuclear bomb. Very scary stuff. Hi as ASCII box, and I'm going to finish with your question, and then I'm going to do my recap. At the end of the war, what will we have to do with all the radicalized Russian minorities? Also, with the radicalized Russians in Russia, doing nothing can be quite expensive in the future. I guess it depends what you mean by radicalized, because there's different groups here, right? The minorities in Russia are pretty pissed off, because they're the ones that Putin has been using disproportionately to send to Ukraine. And they know it, and it's ticking them off. So Putin basically is taking the, brown and yellow people, or whatever you want to say, but basically like the Asian and the Muslim minorities, and using them instead of the nice white Russians to go to Ukraine. And they know it, and they're pissed. So those guys will be less liking the Russian majority when the war is over. The Russians themselves being radicalized, I guess you could say, thank you, Nick. I guess you could say some Russian citizens will be radicalized because they'll be radicalized against their government. Because again, a really disastrous war that not only killed a lot of people, but then you see that the war, that Putin just didn't care, and that it was just a, BS. It could radicalize. Then again, George Bush, I supported the first Iraq war. The second Iraq war was a lie. And it's not like, some of us got upset with George Bush, but it's not like it radicalized Americans for generations. It didn't, but we lost a lot less in the Iraq war than the Russians have in Ukraine. The Russians have lost a hell of a lot more, All right, let me do a quick summary of the story. So these are the news stories that I talked about today. I started with a rather funny story that the Russian Security Council is now saying they have a new reason for why they invaded Ukraine, because they have to de-Satanize Ukraine. Satanism is taking over Ukraine left and right. And now that's why the Russians are there, to stop Satan. Yes. I just talked about the dirty bomb. I summarized it for you guys, what a dirty bomb is, why there's concern about the Russians, because the Russians keep talking more and more and more about the Ukrainians using a dirty bomb, and it's convinced the Americans, the Brits, and the French that maybe it's the Russians themselves that are now preparing to use a dirty bomb. And as I said, use it as a justification for the Russians then using a nuclear bomb to attack Ukraine, which then drags NATO into the war. Big trouble. I then talked about the letter from the liberals in the U.S. House of Representatives, about 20 of the most liberal members of Congress. In America, that means the most left-wing members of Congress, who wrote a letter to Biden urging him to negotiate with Putin. And the letter basically came across 2 weeks before our congressional elections and right after the Republicans themselves talked. Some of them talked about cutting off aid to Ukraine, but other Republicans have been very supportive, which is good. That it came across as an appeasement letter. Well, the letter caused so much trouble for the Democrats who signed it that they didn't just walk it back, Dark Chef. They actually withdrew the letter this morning, whatever that means. But they basically said, we withdraw the letter. It's no longer real. Little weird, but better than not. Brittney Griner's appeal has failed. She's the American basketball star who was in Russia arrested for drug smuggling, and her appeal has failed. She now faces 9 years in a Russian penal colony. These are notoriously awful places. I mean, brutal, deadly places. But this could mean that she is up for a plea deal. And what I mean is a plea deal in the sense that, not a plea deal, but now that she's been convicted, this puts extra pressure on Biden, which is what the Russians want, so that maybe Biden will agree to release, a Russian spy that we've got, or the Russian spy that was in, I don't know if it was Germany or where it was, one of the Russians that they want released. So there's still hope for Brittney, but it's not great. Oh yes, Institute for the Study of War, a big think tank, says that the Ukrainian forces will likely capture the upper Kherson Oblast, which is this north area right above the river over here by New Year's. So in the next 2 months, they think the Russians will be completely kicked out up here, which is a big deal because the town of Kherson is a big deal, in part because Odessa is right over here. Odessa is the big Ukrainian port going to the Black Sea and everywhere else. If the Russians eventually want to take Odessa, but to get Odessa, they need Kherson, because they would then move by land and go over here. So losing the land north of the river puts Russia in a really bad spot if eventually they want to start attacking and taking back more of Ukraine. Russia has lost a quarter of its fleet of attack helicopters in the war, also a big deal. Oh, and then the final story that I didn't get to mention earlier, Russian state media and local officials report that a car bomb exploded outside the offices of Russian broadcaster ZATV in the southern Ukrainian city of Melitopol, which the Russians captured soon after its invasion. It wasn't immediately clear who was behind the attack. Yeah, let me tell you who was behind the attack. Melitopol's over here, occupied by the Russians. What's been going on, especially in Kherson, but also over here, the Ukrainians have got a wonderful resistance network. And by resistance, I mean, you're Ukrainian. You live in the town of Melitopol. The Russians come in. They take thank you for the cap, Ben. They take your town, okay? You're still Ukrainian, but you've got an occupying government now controlling your town. Thank you, Kanausi. You decide, I'm a patriotic Ukrainian. I want to help. But if I just go, down the street and yell at them, they're going to shoot me. Well, my friend's friend knows somebody in Ukrainian intelligence, and they're able to get operatives across the line because the Russians are controlling the area now, right? We're being occupied by the Russians. They're able to get information across. They're able to get bomb-making materials. They're able to get instructions from the Ukrainian government. And we are going to secretly help the Ukrainian government set off bombs and kill Russian officials that are occupying our land. Well, they have been amazingly effective at doing this, especially with car bombs. The Ukrainians have set off a lot of car bombs, blowing up either Russian officials or Ukrainian collaborators who are now working for the Russian occupation authority, the resistance. Thank you, Red Ninja, for that. So the Ukrainians have been blowing up a lot of the Russian occupying authorities, and that's clearly what's happening here. I mean, 99.9% chance. There we go, guys. So thank you. I'm going to sign off. As I said, please do follow me on TikTok and everywhere else. Join me tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, US. I will be back here on TikTok, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and everywhere else. And I think tonight I'm going to skip the Discord. I went last night, but I'm trying not to stretch my voice sort of too much or to strain it too much. But do please go to erevosis.com. As I said, you'll find out how to find my Discord. You can also just support me directly by going to my Patreon if you want. Just do a subscription if you want. I'd appreciate it because I'm doing this for free. And honestly, the only income I'm getting right now is from you guys. And I'm trying to make this a real thing. So I appreciate it. Thank you all for the gifts, for the super chats, for all the gifts on TikTok. You guys are amazing. And we sort of always end by trying to thank the moderators because it is a thankless job, especially on TikTok. And especially now because I've been getting more TikTok followers recently, more people watching the show. And of course, it's brought more bad people. Adam, hard to DM me because my DMs are, I think, closed because I don't want people to, what I can do is, Adam, I will follow you. All right, I followed you. Feel free to DM me. Though afterwards, I'm probably going to unfollow you because I'm only following a few number of people. But you can DM me now on TikTok. Because at least I'm happy to see what you got to say. Just be normal. All right, guys. So thank you so much. I'm going to sign off. Feel free to go to Discord. A lot of folks go and are hanging out there anyway. It's just to talk about politics and lots of stuff. And as I said, I've got a new auction item that's very, very, very cool that is already quite popular over there. Thank you for the hands. And see you guys tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern. All right. Sayonara. You guys. Bye-bye. Boom.